Professor Tyson. I'm very happy to have you again. This time we are going to talk about Moabites and their role in the history of Bronze Age, Iron Age, Levant. How different are Moabites from Ammonites, and what we know about Moabites?
Yeah, the Moabites, it's not clear that they were massively different than the Ammonites. Most likely tribally organized, as far as we can tell. The main difference really is ends up being the geography of where they live. Um, the it's kind of central Moabite territory is often thought of as being between about Wadi al-Hassa and Wadi Mujib. And then with some extension in the ninth, 8th century, maybe at other times up into north of Wadi Mujib up towards Madaba, kind of that area. Um, so the one thing we do know about them, at least from the way they're referred to in the Bible, is that they were, did a lot with shepherding. So, and this area that we're talking about is pretty viable for sheep and goats and that kind of thing. So that's not particularly surprising.
Yeah. Uh, what was the what were relations between Moabites and the Kingdom of Israel and Kingdom of Judah?
Sure. So, let me just
Yeah,
backtrack one.
please.
Did I miss your question about the earlier time about the Bronze Age? Did you say something about that?
Yeah, I said about Bronze Age. I was asking
Okay.
about the Bronze Age Moabite states.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I missed that part in my answer. Let me go back to that before I jump into what's going on with Israel and Judah. So, what we don't know a lot about Moab in the Bronze Age. There's a few references, um, possible references to the area from Moses the Third, and then when you in the Bronze Age Egyptian. Uh, when you get down to Ramses the second, there are a couple of references that are pretty clearly to Moab, and one which seems to indicate that he was involved or his sons were involved in changing over a one of the kings of the area. There's not a lot of information there. It's not clear from those references whether Moab is an integrated kingdom at that point. It's probably more like several small city states or something along those lines. So it's not clear that when we talk about Moab as this kingdom, it's not clear that a kingdom existed as like that in the Bronze Age. It's not until we get down to the excuse me, down to the Iron Age,
Yeah.
roughly mid ninth century, when we start to see something that we would call a kingdom. And even then, it's not 100% clear that the Moabites thought of themselves first as Moabites.
Yes. What were, yes, go ahead.
No, no, no. So now I guess that leads us into the question of what was the relationship between
Yeah.
Moab and Israel and Judah. So from what we can tell from the biblical texts, and also from the Mesha Stele, which comes from the mid ninth century, that Israel, the northern part, ruled from Samaria, had been, in control of Wadi Mujib.
Mhm.
And this is this would be Ahab and Omri, King Ahab and Omri of Israel, having some kind of relationship with the kings of Moab. Maybe we'd call it a vassal, suzerain vassal relationship or big king, subordinate king, whatever you want to say there. And it's with Mesha in the mid ninth century, around maybe 840, somewhere along those lines, that Moab starts to push back against Israel, obviously from his Stele, named after him, who beats back Israel and pushes them out of some areas of Moab. And one thing I wanted to note about Mesha, if you look at the Mesha Stele, he calls himself king of Moab, but he identifies himself as a Dibonite, a person from Dibon. And so even though he's king of Moab, he doesn't call himself a Moabite. He's a Dibonite first, and that seems to highlight the clan or tribal affiliation that he has coming from this place called Dibon, and that suggests that Moab as a kingdom is some kind of conglomeration of other groups that he then rules. But to go back to Israel and Judah, it's not clear really that Judah had a ton of interaction with Moab itself until somewhat later in the Iron Age, although in the biblical text, there's some cases where Israel and Judah seem to fight against Moab together, so they're coordinated. And probably the most famous one of those is with King Jehoram of Israel and Jehoshaphat of Judah, who go and fight against King Mesha, and this is in 2 Kings 3. So there's a interesting, and then this other text here in the Bible, both referring to Mesha and the struggles and fights he had, against Israel and Judah. So, and then later on in the Iron Age, especially once Israel has been destroyed by the Assyrians, you get some texts that indicate that Moab was involved in the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 586. So it seems even at that late time that there was continued animosity between these kind of rival regional groups. So that's the big picture of those
Exactly.
relationships.
Which territory covered the Moabite states? We're talking about the central Jordan in modern times.
Yeah, like I said before, yeah, the central part of Jordan. When I'm talking to people, who aren't familiar with this, I always kind of tell them if visualize where the Dead Sea is,
Yeah.
and you just go east. That's kind of where we're
Yeah.
talking about Moab. A little south of that as well. But that's really, and then out to the desert fringe, right, where
Yeah.
the desert kind of becomes mostly uninhabitable off to the east. So that's that area, and most people talking about this will tend to say that the core or central Moabite area would be, like I said, from Wadi Al-Khasa to north to Wadi Mujib, and then in the time of Mesha, maybe expanding north of Mujib up to Madaba or that area. One thing that's not clear is when there was a kingdom, where the capital was. So Misha is from Dibon, but Dibon, at least what has been archaeologically recovered, uh, has only been material from the 8th and 7th centuries, and it's a small site. So now that's possible. There's more stuff buried under the modern city that we don't have access to, so that's always a possibility. But the site of Dibon that has been archaeologically worked on really isn't that big. Khirbet al-Balua, where I've worked, just south of Wadi Mujib, is quite large. So that's a possibility. And a lot of people have also talked about Kerak as being a capital. Maybe it's one of
Mhm.
several capitals. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have
Maybe they had several capitals. Yes.
to have, sorry, something just happened there.
Yeah. No, no, we reestablished the connection.
Okay.
We were talking about several potential
Sorry, so
sites.
I'll just go back to what I was saying.
Yeah. So we spoke about several potential capitals of
Yeah,
the
I guess
Moabite
what I was saying
Kingdom.
is that, yeah, and it's kind of a, like I said, it was, or like I was saying, it's when you speak of a kingdom, you're often tend to think of one main site, like where the king rules, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes I think it's can be more helpful to think of, a kingdom as having multiple centers of power, and the king, while he may be the most powerful political ruler in a particular area, is still most likely going to have to be working alongside convincing,
Yeah.
coercing in some cases, rulers from some of the others outlying towns, right? And so the king at that level becomes more like a person who has to coordinate and convince and get everyone in line, especially when there's some kind of common enemy.
Speaking about common enemies, who were allies of Moabites and how they established relations with stronger political centers in the region, namely Egypt and Mesopotamia.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the Bronze Age, there seems to have been some, interaction between Egypt um, and Moab. Other than the Egyptian texts, which are just a couple of them, there's the Belua stele, rather famous big stone carved stele, which has text on it that we can't read, but there's an image on it that many have suggested is a Egyptianizing investiture scene, so that it has two Egyptian gods on it, or gods that look Egyptian, and a person in the middle who looks like he's being crowned as king or whatnot. So at the level of kind of artistic rendering, there seems to be some influence there, and that's not particularly surprising. But once you get down into the Iron Age, Egyptian influence artistically continues to some extent, but by the ninth century, and then especially by the 8th century, it's the Assyrians who are the strongest power in the region. And we have a number of inscriptions from the Assyrians that mention various, mostly just the kings of Moab and what they sent to, or what they contributed as tribute to the Assyrian kings. And this included also precious metals like gold. So the things that they contribute, especially the gold, the metals, and that kind of stuff, suggests that Moab, like Ammon, was also profiting off of trade moving through the area, probably in the form of taxes and that kind of thing. So interaction with the Mesopotamian powers was relatively stable across the Iron Age until we get down to the Neo-Babylonians. And then there's some possibility that under Nebuchadnezzar, after he had destroyed Jerusalem, that some years later he might have also taken out Ammon and then Moab and turned them into provinces, although we don't have super explicit information for that. But by the time you get down what look like Persian period provinces of Moab and Ammon.
When we're talking about precious metal, we all know that
Hmm.
Edomites controlled copper mines in Wadi Finan.
Yep. Yep.
Were Moabs part of that trade, and how interconnected were kingdoms of Moab, kingdom of Edomites, and kingdom of course, Ammonites?
Yeah, that is a good question that I don't know that we have a great answer to at this point. However, it should be assumed, I think, that whatever copper was coming out of Edom, any of it that went north, which some of it probably just went west to the coast, and some of it may have gone down south to Arabia, but probably most of it went west to the coast. But stuff that came north, would have had to go through Moabite controlled lands. And, anytime you have people trying to transport stuff across your area, you have some possibility for collecting taxes or protection money, whatever you want to call it, to allow them to go north. Other than the fact that we can kind of imply this or infer this from just the trade routes, we don't have a lot of evidence, direct evidence for copper going through the area. There's been some few small copper finds at various sites, but nothing to suggest like massive production outside of Fainan. So, or massive no, we haven't found any major workshops in Moab to suggest that they were bringing in raw materials from Edom, let's say, and then doing, making finished crafts out of them. So that part remains unknown, but it seems like we can infer that some of that copper must have gone north, and whatever did go north, the Moabites and then probably the Ammonites as well would have had some ability to tax the movement of goods.
How much archaeological evidence we have about Moabites?
Mhm. Not a lot,
Yeah,
unfortunately. There's a few sites that have been excavated. Excuse me, Khirbet al-Mudanya on the Wadi Thamid has been pretty well excavated by Michel Daviau,
yeah,
Canadian
of
with the
course.
Canadian team. Yeah, and that site is in the process of being published. That's a small site. It's basically single period, mostly 8th, 7th century. So there's some good information coming out of there from a small site. Khirbet Ataruz, along, the Dead Sea there is a pretty fascinating site, and it's continuing to be published. There's a kind of temple space there, which is quite interesting. And you can find some of that by Chang Ho Ji and the rest of that team. And then, as I mentioned, Diban has been excavated by Bruce Rutledge and his crew. And they found stuff there. It's mostly 8th and 7th century, which kind of begs the question if Mesha is coming, if Mesha was in the 9th century and the site we're only finding 8th and 7th century stuff, are we missing something, or what's going on with that? We just don't know yet. So yeah, then other sites, there's Khirbet al where I have worked,
Yeah.
largest site in the area, largest iron 2 site in the area, something like 13 hectares of iron 2 material. And then also there have been other excavations, such as at Khirbet Arair on the lip of Wadi Mujib, which has been excavated, and there's Iron Age remains there. And then we have, down pretty far south, Khirbet al-Mudaibi, which is, again, a one-period site, 8th, 7th century. Really well intact site, even though it's quite small. It has a whole bunch of these volute capitals that have been found at it, and suggests that this site was operational during the Assyrian period, probably as a kind of border site controlling or monitoring traffic through the area. And then there's been some finds at places like Kerak, but Kerak is mostly built over, so excavating there is kind of difficult. So the finds have mostly been surface finds and that kind of stuff. So yeah, and there's been some accidental finds here and there, as there usually is.
Yeah.
But those are some of the main sites. And really, I think one of the difficulties or one of the challenges that archaeologists working on Moab continue to face is that there is not yet a really fully agreed upon ceramic typology. So whole set of Moabite pottery and the sequence that really remains to be worked out in a refined way.
What we know about the religious practice and religious beliefs of Moabites, are they much different from Ammonites and Edomites, or they follow the same Semitic deities and customs.
Yeah, pretty much it's all of a single kind of cloth, although the deities maybe change a little bit. In Moab, Kamash, a god named Kamash, seems to be the national, if you want to call it national deity, a royal deity. Is mentioned, of course, in the Mesha stele as particularly favoring Mesha. So yeah, we get that kind of thing, as I mentioned, at Kirbet Ataruz. This is a bit north, kind of south of Madaba a little bit. There's a temple that's
Yeah.
been pretty well excavated and quite interesting. So, people should take a look at that if they get a chance. Um, and then we have a few other deity names and figurines and whatnot. Get a few on seals that have people's names on them. So we get some of the deity names there. And then we have, a few figurines here and there that suggest other deities and that people were worshiping both at maybe the national level or, corporate level. And then, of course, in the household or individual religious kind of practices. So, yeah, one text I was going to mention, what I think is pretty fascinating, and maybe people might find it interesting, and this is in the Second Kings 3 account where Israel and Moab attack Mesha, and he flees back to Kir Hareseth, and they kind of trap him there. And in the text, it says that he took his firstborn who was to succeed him, this is Mesha, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. So but the interesting part is this, that says a great wrath came upon Israel, not on Moab, on Israel. So they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. So whatever is going on there, this is one of my, I don't know, I just find it a super fascinating text that Mesha withdraws to his one of his cities. Israel is surrounding him. He sacrifices his son on the wall, and then a wrath, whatever that means, breaks out on Israel, and they have to leave, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know who he was, sacrificing his son to or whatever, but the way it's presented, anyways, by the biblical authors suggests that it worked, which is kind of interesting.
How Hebrew Bible describes Moabites? We have different
Mm,
accounts in the Christian
yeah,
Bible and Hebrew Bible, or maybe
yeah.
they are similar.
No, well, I mean, the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament are, one and the same, more or less. Obviously, in the Catholic and Orthodox canons, there's the Old Testament is longer than the Hebrew Bible and the Protestant Old Testament, but other than that, they're the same. And it- there's a couple different ways that I guess I've thought about how the Hebrew Bible portrays Moab and Ammon. And there's a kinship element that is acknowledged, and you get this, for example, in the text in Genesis, where Lot is understood to be the progenitor of the offspring who become the Moabites and the Ammonites. So even though it's a kind of a little backhanded smack in the face, because they're the product of incest, they're still understood to be kin, right? They're still family, extended family as a way, in a sense. And that suggests a cultural and political kind of similarity there, regardless of whether the actual genealogy works out, right? That's like it's showing cultural similarity and whatnot. And then when you get to texts in Numbers and Deuteronomy when Israel is coming out in the Exodus. What's interesting about some of those texts is that it portrays the Ammonites and Edomites and Moabites as already being situated in the land that they are at the time the Exodus is happening. Now, archaeologically, we can't confirm that or anything like that. So who knows? But it is interesting that the text is presenting them as already being there. And in Deuteronomy 2 and 3, it actually says that the God of Israel gave Ammon and Moab their land.
Yeah,
So that's the reasoning for why Israel coming out of the Exodus should not bother them.
yeah,
So it's an interesting kind of portrayal. After that, Moab and Ammon and Edom are often enemies of Israel, fighting them in various skirmishes and wars and whatnot. So you get the kinship part, you get the enemy part, and then once you get to the prophetic texts in the Hebrew Bible, you also get a portrayal that when Israel and Judah are brought back, from exile and whatnot, that also Moab and Ammon and whatnot will be restored as well. So it's interesting this kind of entangling of these peoples, sometimes seen as enemies, sometimes as kin, but maybe that's how, things work. Often it's the case that people who are closest together have that share the most are often also enemies.
So,
Right? They share the most and they have the most to disagree about.
yeah, I mean, we have that within the same ethnic group, which is split
Yeah,
between different confessions and different denominations. It's not only in the Middle
exactly.
East, it's in
Exactly.
Europe. We
Oh
have,
yeah, it's everywhere.
yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah,
For how
agreed.
long the Moabites fought with the Kingdom of Judah and Kingdom of Israel? We're talking about a few hundred years.
Yeah, yeah. So through the Iron Age, let's say from I don't know, if you just say from 1000 to 500 or
64,
something like that.
maybe to
What?
64 when Pompey annexed the whole Levant. We're talking about the Roman annexation of that territory in 64.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, by then though, I guess it's a question of how you want to talk about these things. When you get to by the Persian period, starting in 539 BCE, what we called Israel, Judah, Ammon, Moab are not independent polities anymore.
Yeah,
Certainly, there's still people that call themselves these things, right? So I'm not dismissing that, but they don't have, for any length of time, their own political organization. They're mostly under the thumb of an empire. But certainly, even if they don't have their own kingdoms, they're still squabbling and, fighting at certain points with each other. So yeah, for several hundred years at least. And
exactly.
depending on how you understand, the history of like the Bronze Age and Iron One. I mean, I don't have any reason to think they didn't fight then. It's just that if you look at the biblical texts, most of them are written later, so it's not clear how reliable they are for the Iron One period or late Bronze as far as history is concerned.
I mean, we have accounts that during the reign of Ashurbanipal, Moab was a vassal state which provided the military for his campaigns in Levant against Egyptian kingdom.
Hmm. Yep.
Do we have written evidence about the political structure of Moabite state, or let's say statelets, because they were not an independent state, even
Yeah.
for criterions of politics from ancient times.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. What did the state
Yeah,
look like?
they were paying tributes to different regional centers.
Yeah, no, for sure. When the Assyrians really under Tiglath-Pileser III really consolidate their control of the
Hmm?
southern Levant, it's clear that and we have these in the text from the Assyrians that Moab paid tribute and became a vassal. Now, being a vassal doesn't mean as a vassal you still typically have a king. So, um, but what that kingship looked like is, again, we often come to it with some preconceptions about what a king is. I think maybe the best way, or one of the best ways I tend to think about this is a king is kind of like a one-man rule. So there's
Yeah,
a guy at the apex.
but
How much power he actually has at any given moment is a little bit up for grabs, but he certainly is the leading power in a given area. And it seems like, some have suggested this from the Mesha Stele, the way he talks about it, is that really that person is a person who's able to get allegiance from all the tribes under him. And so what we're talking about, some people will call it a tribal kingdom or something like that, because it's not just that there's one guy and he has all this authority, but that he's able at some level to convince or coerce all the tribal leaders under him that, he's should be the leader. And but at any point you can get these sub-tribes, if you want to call them that or whatever, that might decide to affiliate with someone else, right? And actually, in the Mesha Stele, when he's talking about fighting up in the north, and he talks about the men of Gad, who, Gad is one of the tribes of Israel. It's possible that the men of Gad just thought of themselves as being Gadites,
Yeah, yeah, yes.
right? And then at one point they affiliated with Israel, and then another point they were coerced by Mesha. And the whole time they might have called themselves Israel and they might have called themselves Moabites, but the most important thing to them was that they were Gad.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, there's a
They
lot
had a
more that could be
fluid
said.
identity. We are talking about very fluid
Yeah,
national identity, speaking in
yeah,
modern terms.
yeah. No, absolutely. And
And
I think
also
that's
we had
what's going on.
intermarriage between these people. You didn't have first of all very very well defined borders at that time. Borders
Right.
were very fluid, and especially people traveled and had all kinds of interconnectedness between these two regions. We cannot talk about
Yeah.
maybe nation states in modern terms. Also, even in modern terms, people travel. They have all kinds of personal and collective relations, and you cannot just cut the border or cut these groups by the axe. It doesn't work this way.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that, if I could put it this way, and I sounds like you would more or less kind of agree with this, is that, even in the modern context, what we call a nation state it's a cultural construct, right?
It is a
And
cultural
it's
concept.
it's held up by the number of people that, accept it and
True,
ascribe to it, right?
true, because you
And
don't
it
have
breaks down when,
yeah, you don't have homogeneous states in literal sense of the word. In most cases, yeah,
yeah,
especially at that time when you didn't have defined borders with all kinds of administrative mechanisms to maintain the boundary, it was much easier to cross from one side to another. Do you plan
yeah, no,
to
absolutely.
work in Balua in coming months or
Mhm.
in next year?
Mhm.
Are you planning to
You
work
want me to
in
talk about
Balua?
that?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, so the team was supposed to be in the field this summer right now, but the political military situation just made people too nervous. Although
Of course.
honestly, it probably would have been fine, but in any case, so right now the plan is to be there in next summer, so 2025. That would be the plan, and the plan is, again, there's like uh, four main areas that we've been working on, kind of a sampling of different parts of the site. Three of those are in the Iron Age, and then we have a team over on there's an Islamic period, probably a Khan, like caravan stopping point that is there that started on last season. And so they're hoping to continue working on that as well this upcoming season. But yeah.
Thank you so much. We're going to continue with our conversations. It was very
Thank you, Todd.
informative, and I'm sure you're very busy. even though it's summer. And we're going to talk very soon. I'm planning to
Okay.
discuss Edomites with you and
Okay.
also other topics. We can go kingdom by kingdom and theme by theme. Thank you so
That
much.
sounds great. Thanks,
Thank
Todd.
you.
Appreciate
All
it.
the best.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.